Hello and welcome to The Window, brought to you by talkSPORT Bet. My name is Harry Durham. Every single day of the transfer window, we'll be bringing you the biggest stories, the movers and shakers, the done deals, the failed deals, everything right here on the talkSPORT YouTube channel. It's been a massive Monday already, and I'm pleased to say that talkSPORT transfer expert Ben Jacobs joins me now. Ben, let's get straight into it then, mate. It feels like every time that we speak to each other, something major happens just before we're going live. What is the latest? What is happening with Alexander Isak now at Newcastle?
Yeah, a mad Monday, but this one actually hasn't progressed that much, but two new lines to bring you. So Liverpool are there, waiting patiently. They've not walked away, but they're not inclined to bid unless given any encouragement. And we've known that for quite some time. And it's kind of like a game of poker, really, because are Newcastle going to give the encouragement? Should they find two replacements? Yoane Wissa is one of them that I'm expecting to get done. Very possibly, but by the same token, until they get those replacements, there's not really much that Liverpool can do. But the new lines to bring you. The first is that Liverpool's perspective is this is exactly like their pursuit of Anthony Gordon a year ago, even though he didn't end up joining. By that, I mean, to begin with, Newcastle, who had PSR issues during the early part of the window, came to Liverpool and said, we might be prepared to sell. So Liverpool engaged, they got the deal ready, it was very close. Then at the last minute, Newcastle sold Elliot Anderson to Nottingham Forest and Yakuba Minter to Brighton. And as a consequence, when Liverpool actually put the bid in formal terms, Newcastle changed their perspective. But the point here is there was a period in time when Newcastle initiated contact to Liverpool and said, come and bid. This is in the interests of all parties. So Liverpool are effectively waiting for that call or encouragement, which of course means if they place a second bid, it will be done with absolute confidence that they're not being messed around, that they're not bidding blindly. And that was actually the case with the first bid, because my understanding is that Newcastle called up Liverpool and said, we should have a conversation here, because they realised that Alexander Isak was trying to force his way out. And that's why Liverpool were then surprised when the bid was rejected so emphatically at £110 million. The other thing I've learned in the last 24 hours is that, as we've said before, there's two extremes here. Either out of nowhere, Isak will sign a new deal and he'll have an out in order to leave in a year's time, or alternatively, he'll leave for Liverpool. And there's no middle ground anymore, because all parties feel it would be untenable to keep Isak at the football club beyond the window on his current terms and on his current contract. So the expectation, therefore, has always been that Newcastle and Isak need to sort things out, and Newcastle need to go out into the market, and then the door may be open to Liverpool. But I'm told regarding Isak and a potential new deal at Newcastle, he will not engage with Newcastle or discuss it or consider it until Liverpool tell him first and directly, we're out. We're not going to bid, or this is not going to happen. So this isn't about Newcastle telling Alexander Isak, you're stuck here, so you need to sign a new deal, as has been suggested in the last 24, 48 hours. Isak wants that communication from Liverpool to say, we're out. It's not possible. Our read of this is that we will not be able to get you. And if he doesn't hear that from Liverpool, then he will not engage to try and find a solution around reintegration or a new contract with Newcastle United. And that's where we stand. So not a great deal of movement, but some aspects of this plot starting to develop now. And obviously all parties want clarity sooner rather than later, especially because, remember, it's not just the beginning of the Premier League season and it's not just the end of the window, but sandwiched in between is a game between Newcastle United and Liverpool, which further adds to the drama.
It's already toxic to begin with anyway in some elements, but now with him saying that he wants the comment coming from Liverpool, he's in a bit of a weird position because he can't throw his toys out of the pram massively because he still needs to be able to play football at the same time as well. And, you know, the Newcastle fans, the Geordies, they're so passionate that, you know, he's been trying to force this move out. But if it doesn't come to fruition in this window, I mean, where does he really stand? Because obviously, like I said, you've got to play football, but still at the same time, if there's a fan base that you don't want against you, it's those guys at St James's Park.
Yes, and they're great fans. It's a tremendous club. I still think they're going to have a positive month away from whatever happens with the Isak saga. Malik Thiaw is obviously formalising his move, a defensive reinforcement from Milan, Johan Wissa. I'm hearing very positive things. And then whether it's Samu, Nicholas Jackson or another striker, I still think they can reinforce with the option, of course, of still standing their ground on Alexander Isak. And the fan base ultimately are going to celebrate their football club if their football club is winning games, succeeding, and ultimately, in Isak's case, scoring goals. And because we're in a World Cup year, if he is still a Newcastle United player beyond the window, I think all parties will kind of change the narrative and the tone. It reminds me a little bit of when PSG fell out with Kylian Mbappe and there was spin and counterspin and politics and drama. And then suddenly out of nowhere, Mbappe and Nasser Al-Khalifi were saying, it's all fine. Everybody's been effectively in a room and smoothed it all over, and what a fantastic player Kylian Mbappe is. And then it only really blew up again after Mbappe left the club on a free transfer for PSG, when of course Kylian Mbappe started taking legal action to try and get back loyalty bonuses that PSG considered waived. With Alexander Isak, I come back to what I said before. The reason why that middle ground of just window shutting and him staying on this current deal is gone and seen as untenable, both by the Isak side and Newcastle, is partly because of the point that you raise. In other words, if Isak goes to Liverpool, then all parties may be satisfied in terms of the finances. Liverpool get their dream target, Newcastle get their money and their other attackers. But if he stays, I don't see a scenario where it's just on these current terms, even though he's well compensated and there's 3 years left, because that's when you get tension between player and club. And that's where you don't have the ability to reintegrate and effectively have the right optics. Whereas imagine if tomorrow, despite the noise, it was suddenly Alexander Isak has signed a new deal. I think the Newcastle United fans would look at that at face value, look at the quotes, look at the fact the player and the club suddenly appear on the same page, and maybe think, wait a minute, maybe this problem, maybe this tension was not how it was all billed. And it's exactly the same, by the way, with Morgan Gibbs-White, that Nottingham Forest fans have celebrated him signing a new deal, even though there was a point in time where if the release clause Tottenham thought they had triggered legally before backing off was acknowledged by Nottingham Forest, then Morgan Gibbs-White might be a Tottenham player. But Forest fans are still happy to celebrate the new deal because it draws a line under it and you think, okay, player wouldn't have signed a new deal if he wasn't committed to at least the season ahead. And I think that's why it now has to be these two extremes of either Isak leaves or Isak signs a new deal with no middle ground.
This morning, talkSPORT chief football correspondent Alex Crook told the on-air team that Jack Grealish will be joining Everton for a season-long loan. This has been something that's been going on for the last couple of weeks. What more can you tell us about the deal? Because it was that £300,000 a week that was potentially hampering this deal going over the line and him to go to Everton. What's the situation there? Are Manchester City going to be paying the full sum?
Yeah, so the situation is Jack Grealish was always keen to move to Everton. There was positive dialogue over the weekend and into this morning. And then finally, we have an agreement in principle between the clubs for a loan with an option to buy set at £50 million. And from Everton's point of view, it's a great deal because, yes, they have to cover a high Grealish wage, but they get the opportunity to have a player who's hungry to play in this season and really find some form. And if it works, then I'm sure Everton will give strong consideration to making the purchase permanent. And from Grealish's point of view, the priority was always to get playing every week and to stay in the Premier League. And there's kind of a subplot here. I think it's the same for Jordan Henderson, who chose to move to Sunderland. It's the same for Ben Chilwell, who's looking for first-team football somewhere. It's the same for Ivan Toney in Saudi Arabia, and with Grealish too, that Thomas Tuchel has said to all four, doesn't matter about your age or the league you're playing in, if you have a strong season, you stand a chance of World Cup selection. So Jack Grealish really wanted this sorted before the first Premier League game of the season to know that he could get the regular minutes and the game time playing at a high level and in the Premier League. And as a consequence, this is a move for both him and Everton, but also Grealish and England as well. The medical is taking place today at the time we're recording this. It's a Monday lunchtime, so by the afternoon, I'm expecting the deal to really be in motion in terms of formalisation, with an announcement expected imminently by the early part of this week. And I think in the end, it's just a deal that suits all parties because Manchester City get the wage off the books and potentially a permanent exit. Everton get a top player who is hungry to find that form that I mentioned before. And at the same time, there's an element of try before you can buy, with Everton standing the chance, if it all goes well anyway, of taking that option to buy. Or obviously you can always negotiate it in a year's time too. So I think this is just one of those deals that was always going to get done once the wheels were in motion, because it seems to suit all parties.
Let's go on to Mark Guehi's future at Crystal Palace. And first of all, congratulations to the club and Mark Guehi for winning the Community Shield, beating Liverpool on penalties yesterday at Wembley. There've been a lot of question marks over Guehi's future in the last couple of windows. I feel like it's been going on for quite a while now, links to both Liverpool and Newcastle. The Magpies did submit an offer for the defender in January, but was unsuccessful. Now, Crystal Palace chairman Steve Parish is saying that Guehi could be sold, especially with this being the final year of his contract. What price are Palace looking at for Guehi if he is to be sold?
Yeah, first of all, as you say, congratulations to Crystal Palace on winning the Community Shield, 2 trophies in 4 months with the FA Cup last season. Commiserations, though, as well. It's been a strange 24 hours, because after beating Liverpool on penalties, this morning it was made official that they'll stay in the UEFA Conference League after being demoted from the Europa League due to a multi-club breach. Even though John Textor has left, even though Palace are adamant that Textor doesn't have, or didn't now have, any decisive influence, and yet CAS have upheld the original decision. Palace will have to look at their legal options now, but it's looking very likely that they stay demoted and Nottingham Forest get upgraded to the Europa League. But regarding Mark Guehi, I think partially Palace not having Europa League football might make a couple of players say they want to go elsewhere. And then Palace also, having had a difficult summer financially, moving in the market, need to think about the loss of money. There's not necessarily a huge difference between UEFA Europa Conference League and Europa League. And some may make the argument that Palace could go very far in the latter, and as a consequence might make more money because they could play more games compared to a higher standard in the Europa League. So we'll have to kind of wait and see how it pans out on the field. But regarding Mark Guehi, it's always been the case that Palace want to sell. So even though Steve Parish made that point yesterday after the Community Shield, the reality is all summer Palace want to sell Mark Guehi because they know, and this is the key point, he's not going to sign a new deal. And as a result, they don't want to lose him on a free transfer in 12 months' time. So the price has come down from rejecting a Spurs offer in January of 70 million to quoting suitors closer to 50 million at the beginning of the window, 45 million in the middle of the window. And now the feeling is that Crystal Palace want about 40 million. And yet suitors are looking for south of that number. And if the price continues to drop, there may be a deal to be had. We know that Liverpool like Guehi. Malik Thiel's arrived at Newcastle. I was never led to believe that Newcastle were going to reignite their interest in Mark Guehi, but Liverpool might still be one to watch between now and the end of the window. And if they move, it will be on their terms. It will be because the price drops further south of 40 million. But they are looking at some younger defenders as well in the age group of 18 to 22. So I certainly wouldn't call Guehi the only option that Liverpool have on their radar. And this is kind of going to be what makes it so interesting, because Liverpool may stand firm on their valuation of Mark Guehi and then get the price they want and do that deal. But I'm also told the Parma defender, for example, Giovanni Leone, is another name on Liverpool's radar. And then Charlie Cresswell has been looked at too, the former Leeds defender who's now at Toulouse. And these just a few years younger than Mark Guehi. So we wait and see what direction Liverpool go in. And the other thing in all of this is just, even if Palace want to sell, even if Guehi won't sign a new deal, and even if clubs like Liverpool want to move, you got to be able to persuade Guehi of the game time that he's going to get in a World Cup year. And if you can't, then I'm told there's a possibility that Guehi might decide to run his contract down, to play every week, to captain Crystal Palace, then to decide his future on a free transfer after the World Cup. And that's not a scenario Palace wants, but the player can just run down his contract. And if he's still at Crystal Palace, I fully expect him to be playing every week. They're not going to freeze him out or try and force him out of the football club. So it's a fascinating scenario where if Liverpool are to do the deal, it's got to be under 40 million, and you've got to persuade Guehi with Ibrahima Konate and Virgil van Dijk at the football club. He's going to get enough game time in a World Cup year. So we'll have to wait and see how this pans out, but it wouldn't surprise me if this one drags on at least a few more days, if not until right towards the final few days of the window.
Ben, thank you so much for your time. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, to subscribe to the talkSPORT YouTube channel just down below. Keep up to date with everything involving the transfer window. It'll be right here on the talkSPORT YouTube channel. See you later.